Hello everyone, welcome to Threes to Wound, and today we're doing something a little bit different. This is the first of, I guess, my tactical reports where I'm going to sort of walk you through a bit of a battle that I recently had, a game of Kill Team versus the Ork Kommandos, running the new Genestealer Cult Wyrmblade. So this was the second time I got to run these guys, and I guess when I did a video very recently asking you guys what you'd hope to see this year, one of the biggest responses I got was more in-depth sort of tactical analysis of how people go about those battles, how they think about different situations and what's running through your head before you make different moves, how you build your team, why you choose different tac ops. So that's what this is really hoping to show you guys, is a bit of a thought into, well, my noggin here. Not necessarily the best thing in the world, best place to be, but it'll still be a bit of fun. It gives you a little bit of an idea of my thought process as I play the game, how I'm trying to run things, and it's interesting too. Being a new team, it's very interesting having to learn all the new rules, catch up what your units can do, work out all the synergies and everything and get them running properly. Playing an opponent as well, the wonderful Mr. Hurley, playing him and his Ork Kommandos today. He's also quite new to his team. This is only the third game he's run the Commandos as well, so it's kind of good. It brings the playing level down to a bit more even, where we're both sort of figuring out and finding the best ways to run this team. Well, the best place to start, I guess, is we'll take a look at the mission we're going to play today, and then we'll go from there. Let's jump in. First things first was to pick the mission, and we were looking at the critical operations. We went with 2.1 escalating hostilities, so that's where you have 6 objectives littered around the map, roughly pentagon apart, 2 in the center of the battlefield and the other 4 around. At the end of the second and third initiative phases, starting with the player who has initiative, each player removes 1 objective marker that is closest to their drop zone. So basically, the longer the game goes on, we start to lose those objectives, and that's really starting to push all our operatives into the middle. And of course, the important thing, how you score points. At the end of the first and second turning point, for each objective marker friendly operatives control, you score 1 victory point, to a maximum of 4 victory points per player per turning point. And at the end of the third and fourth turning point, for each objective marker friendly operatives control, you score 2 victory points. So to place the terrain, we took it in turns, dropping 1 item at the time, and you can probably see from this picture there's an awful lot of symmetry in this battlefield, which isn't always the best way to set up. It can definitely give one team an advantage and the other a disadvantage. Watching this setup happen, where we basically ended up with 2 forts in each of the deployment zones, I could already see was definitely going to give me a big advantage. The Genestealer Cults have a big team with lots of guns, lots of snipers, and lots of guys who can maximize the use of vantage points, especially with those objectives quite in the open in that center. So when we're pushing up the battlefield, I was definitely going to be able to cover those with a lot of line of sight with a lot of my heavy weapons. So it may have been a little bit of a mistake for the beautiful battlefield from the Ork Commander here. We shall see. You can see the deployment zones at the top and the bottom there of the map. We rolled off to see who would be able to pick their deployment zone first, and the Orcs won, choosing that top end. So they will be the defenders for the mission, and the Genestealer Cult will be the attackers. Now the fun part, time to pick the teams. The first operative we looked at here was the neophyte leader. So basically you had to take one of these guys. It was just about choosing what weapons. I was going to go close combat just because I like to use this unit as a little bit of a deterrent. I know I'm going to be using Shadow Vector to help buff my shooting unit, giving them access to Slink into Darkness or Coiled Serpent without having to spend the CP. So the point of this unit for me basically will be to sit it with units that need to shoot and then scoot, basically get back into cover. I've gone with the bolt pistol and the power maul. Basically the bolt pistol just because it's one of the stronger choices. I really would have liked to have gone the mastercrafted auto pistol. I just don't have any modeled with that. And having the power maul, it's pretty consistent, pretty reliable for attacks, hitting on 3s, 4, 5, and it's got stun. Next time I will be trying the chainsword, but for this one, that's how it's modeled. Next up, it's the Calamorph. Now, this is the first of my agent models, obviously getting to take 2 in each of these kinds of lists. I'm really excited about the Calamorph model just because of, well, rule of cool. He's really cool, but especially with the way this map is set up, I think he can really do a lot of work in that mid-table part of the battlefield, Where those two crucial objectives are in that middle is, I guess, all pretty much pentagon range, and that's where he really does his heavy hitting. There's also some cover that I think he can really take advantage of there, that he can use his 3 APL to jump out, get some shots off, and then get back into cover, or jump out and be able to take out 2 operatives with his ability to shoot twice. The second of my cult agent models, it has to be the Sanctus Sniper. On a map like this where we can see there's lots of vantage points, I really think he can help to dominate the battlefield. Again, crucially, a lot of terrain heavily looking over those 2 middle objectives, which are just going to become more and more important as the game goes on, especially with there being other vantage points too for enemy snipers. I'm definitely going to be using him for a bit of counter sniping to make sure that I can keep board dominance, I guess, on those vantage points. I think if I can get him in the right position, if I get lucky with my deployments in turn 1, I think he can really make sure that the Orcs are going to be on the back foot straight away. Heavy weapon gunners was the next choice, and I did decide to take 2. The mining laser is an absolute no-brainer, that's for sure. I think if you're going to take this list, you always take the mining laser. It's one of your most consistent big damage dealers. And again, used in conjunction with something like the Sanctus, it can be really good at dominating a part of the battlefield or a bit of area denial as well. The other option, I was struggling a little bit, tossing up between the heavy stubber and the seismic cannon. In the end, I did go the seismic cannon. I do like the idea of the 2 profiles. It's got a bit of stun, so might help to limit the mobility a little bit of the Ork Kommandos. And I had a little bit of a sneaky plan of where I might be able to get it in a pretty dangerous position to maximize its use of the shortwave. For the Neophyte Gunners, again, taking 2 here. I was tempted with that extra option you've got in there, heavy, and also the gunner slot, to drop 1 and maybe look at taking some more acolytes. But I thought, why not, bit more bang for your buck. I took a few more guns and thought, we'll give them a go. The grenade launcher is always an auto-include for me. I always make sure I take one of these with my Neophyte Gunners. Like what we had with the heavy weapons, and it's a bit of a toss-up between the Flamer and the Weber. I've been trying to give the Weber a little bit more of a go, a bit more consistently. I knew the Ork Commander was definitely going to be onto Torrent with the Flamer, so I just thought the Weber, with the Lethal 5+, its stun ability, was going to add a little bit more consistency to what it could do, and I guess its threat in terms of limiting maneuverability by taking away one of their AP. Next up's the Neophyte Icon Bearer. Again, I think this is an auto-include. There's really no negative to taking this. It's basically a Neophyte anyway with the rest of the stat line, but you get the extra abilities, and obviously Icon Bearer could come in handy here, especially with how I'm thinking of deploying, or at least hoping to deploy. I want to have the Icon Bearer up on one of the vantage points with some of my gunners. My heavy gunners, could be the snipers as well. He's obviously got Signal the Strike, which is going to help improve my Cult Ambush abilities. So having him up in those spots can be really handy. But on top of that, because of the Icon Bearer, it basically adds an APL to his ability to claim objectives. So those ones in the middle, if it gets to a bit of late game, being able to drop him down, get him on an objective late in the game and hold it, or even, not contest it, but take it away from other 2 APL units is really handy. And of course, he takes the shotgun because it's going to get up close and personal there. And when he's on the vantage points, it's obviously great for clearing those lines, keeping guys down off those vantage points. Lastly, it's the Goon Squad. It's 4 Neophyte Brood Adepts, all with auto guns. These guys are purely there to be GA2 and hold objectives. I am also planning on using hiding with a couple of them as well. And when we talk equipment with these guys as well, you'll see a little bit of what my plan is to add a little bit of bang for my buck with them as well. But these guys are really there to hold objectives, use the auto guns so they're a bit more versatile than the shotguns with a longer range, and just be a bit of a nuisance. So that's the team in all its glory. The only thing to do now was to add some equipment to it. I wanted to keep the equipment really simple for this match just because I was already having to learn and follow so many new rules. So I thought I'd keep it as simple as possible. And what simpler way or simpler weapon is there than grenades? So I wanted to use this in conjunction with my 2 Neophyte Brood Adepts that I was going to have in hiding. So I equipped both of them with blasting charges. So I thought that could be a really cool way to drop them in and have a bit of a surprise for anyone who gets too close to them or pushes them too early. So hoping that pays out pretty well. The other bit of equipment we took was some climbing equipment. So equipment. Some climbing equipment for my heavy weapons guys, as well as my leader and the wonderful doof stick or banner bearer there. Climbing equipment was just going to be really, really crucial in this one because there was so many vantage points and it was quite a dense board in terms of terrain. So I thought give those heavy weapon guys a little bit more maneuverability to be able to get them in position easier. The plan was really simple with this team. You can probably see there's a real distinct lack of close combat in this team, and that is deliberate. I always find close combat to be really, really brutal, and for this being my second game with this team, I didn't really want to risk losing too many of my big operatives, my cult agents early on, so I went with options I thought that I'd be able to keep alive easier. And especially with the way this map is set up, or this terrain is set up, you can see there's so many vantage points. So the more heavy weapons and shooting that I can get down the line and on those vantage points, I think I'll really have a distinct advantage over the commandos. The other positive too is compared to the commandos, I have a lot of units that I can leave behind or leave it on an objective, and it doesn't hurt my team. It's not a really big detriment. Having those brood adepts and being able to just go, well, I can leave them wherever I want. I'm not really losing anything in the greater sphere of the battlefield. Whereas for the commandos, with all those really specialized units, each one you have to leave it on objective can really hurt you later in the game because they're not getting to have the impact you'd want them to. Speaking of orcs, you can see them there, and that's the team that I was facing on this day. They've got a comms boy, Dacker boy, burner boy, breacher boy, slasher boy, just a regular commando boy, the bomb squig, a sniper boy, rocket boy, and of course the big boss knob there. So the Commandos is a really, really good team. They have such great specialists, lots of character. This team, though, has definitely got a lot more shooting than probably a lot of people would expect from an Orc team. You know, having the Sniper Boy, the Rocket Boy, and your Dacker Boy, they're three really capable operatives who can definitely deal out a lot of damage in the right situations. So I think they're going to be my target priority in those earlier turns, making sure I can get them off the board to maintain that fire superiority. And then, as the battle progresses into those second, third, fourth turns, then it'll be thinking about things that want to get up close and personal and start, well, blowing me up for a better, I guess, for want of a better term. Things like the Bomb Squig, you've got the Flamer Boy, and even the Knob in close combat, Slasher Boy. Those guys are then going to be a lot more dangerous in those later turns. So if I can establish that presence early and make sure that I own those middle objectives with my firing lines, hopefully I can minimize the effectiveness of the toughness of orcs, especially in close combat. When it came to the TAC ops, the choice was between Seek and Destroy and Infiltrate. I thought this was going to be a bit of a barn burner and there's going to be lots of opportunities to get some kills, especially with characters like the Sanctus and the Calamorph. So I went with that. I also popped in the faction-specific TAC ops as well, hoping to get a couple of those and give them a go as well. In the end, we got Rout, so I mean, I think this is a good one. I know I'm going to be able to hurt them early in when they're still back near their deployment zone, so getting a VP for incapacitating enemy while they're still within Pentagon of their deployment zone. And then I knew they were going to have some shooters who were going to be up on those vantage points as well, so I thought very good chance to be able to get 2 for this as well. Headhunter was an obvious one, mainly because I needed to kill that boss knob very, very early on. If I didn't do that, I think he could definitely cause a bit of a ruckus amongst my lines. So he was definitely going to be a target priority for me. The final one was the faction-specific one, Nowhere Unreachable. Now, I'm always a little bit hesitant to give my opponent any control in terms of how I score my objectives, or at least no more than the game will give them normally. I thought this might have been a bit of fun, though, because genuinely I thought there's not really too many places that he can hide it that I didn't think I'd be able to get an operative. I also had my units in hiding as well, so I thought there's definitely a good chance that they'll be able to get that. This one, he found the one good spot though to place this one, which did make it quite difficult, which was, you'll see a little bit later on, but it was still fun. The Orcs had the privilege of setting up first, and they spread out pretty evenly across the backfield there. They had 4 of the boys, the Breacher, Rocket, a Commando, and the Knob together, obviously going to secure that first left-hand side objective. In the middle, there was the Bomb Squid with the Comms Boy. Initially, the Sniper Boy was also with them, but he did, for 1 CP, purchase Sneaky Git, and then he moved the Sniper Boy up onto the top of a vantage point there, overlooking some of the objectives. And then lastly, on the right side of the battlefield, he had the Flamer Boy, the Stabby Slasher Boy, and the Dacker Boy all together as well to secure that other objective. There was also doors at the front parts of both those sets of terrain, so I think the plan here was definitely for the Ork team to set up under that terrain and then use the doors there to sally forth to give my guys a bit of strife, and also keep them in cover and protect them from the shooting, at least for the first turn. For myself, the first thing I did was pop 2 units into hiding. That was my 2 Neophyte Adepts with the grenades equipped. You can see my pretty classy method of marking equipment there. Some beautiful little balls of blue tack. Nailed it, what a pro. So they'll be getting ready to jump on during that first turning point for a bit of sneaky explosions. I was lucky enough in this deployment to have a vantage point actually in there. It did mean that one of the objectives, as opposed to, like my opponent, both of them being hidden behind cover, it was a little bit more out in the open. But the benefit being here that I was able to place my Sanctus, a grenade launcher, an autogun guy who for a little bit of a jump over there to get that objective, and the icon bearer could all set up camp up there and be overlooking that objective, as well as in a dangerous position to move forward and down the board a little bit later on. On the other side of the battlefield, I put my mining laser, my seismic cannon, the Weber, my leader, and the final neophyte adept. The point of these guys being here was to secure that vantage point directly ahead of them. So this would basically give me both those vantage points overlooking the whole battlefield. 2 heavy weapons on that side, a grenade launcher and the Sanctus on the other. The leader there obviously to give his benefit with the strategic ploys that he's able to give for free. And the Weber was actually going to be used to be able to either go up there to defend those guys or to push forward through the gap in the terrain there to secure some of those objectives a little bit later on. The other Neophyte Adept who was there, well, he had one job, and that was to hold the objective that was nestled neatly under the terrain there. The last model to place was the Calamorph, and I just nestled him in under the cover there as well. Basically going to use him as a bit of a middle of the battlefield threat a little bit later on. There's quite a bit of terrain ahead of him, so I'll really hopefully be able to leapfrog him up to get to those objectives late game. Maybe even early game if I can keep enough of the threats away from him, but I think he's going to be more of a counter charge or counter attack unit once the Orcs do move out of cover. We also both placed down all our barricades as well. I did forget to point that out. Just both using those really for more defensiveness to help hide our guys in the deployment phase. And as you can see, my entire team is in conceal because, well, why would you not? Because Cult Ambush lets you change any or all orders as you need them. So a really, really powerful strat, and it does mean early days, if you place your team correctly, you really shouldn't be taking any fire, and you can be the one who chooses when to engage. For the scouting phase, we both went with the free dash to make sure we get a little bit of movement and move some guys into some better positions. This meant, as the attacker, that I got the initiative. For my dash, I just pushed the mining laser up against the side of the terrain there, completely forgetting that that wasn't necessary because I'd taken the climbing equipment. But, you know, comme ci comme ça, it didn't matter anyway, got him to the position he needed to be. My opponent, on the other hand, he dashed his Breacher Boy in under the cover there, obviously planning to have him smashing through the wall in his first activation. There was only one thing to be done for the first activation of the game, and that was to get my Sanctus Sniper to take out this so-called Sniper Orc. Is that even a thing? Well, not anymore, because he absolutely rinsed him. These guys are amazing. The reason I went with this first, probably could have waited, but I just wanted to make sure. I know that the Sniper Boys do have some abilities that can help them remove cover, also let them shoot from silence. So I just thought if I can clear him off straight away, then effectively I gain control over the battlefield right from the get-go. With my sniper already in the perfect spot, obviously it's a silent weapon, so I can shoot from conceal, but I also spent the 2 AP, one for target vulnerability, which gives lethal 5+. I also used Familiar's Soul Side, and that was how I was able to actually hit that operative, even though they were in cover and in conceal mode. So yeah, it's a very, very powerful combination, and well, that's one less Orc in the world. In response to pieces of Orc falling on them, the comms was very quick to realise he may have been in a bit of trouble and scarpered into some cover. In response to said sneakiness, the mining laser climbed up onto the terrain on that vantage point and made sure that he was going to have a shot lined up for the next turn. Who says bomb squigs are silly? He also chose to make a quick run into cover to save himself till he gets his chance to blow up on his own terms. The next thing to do, and one of the most important things never to forget to do, was start claiming your objectives. So I used the Neophyte Brood Adepts ability GA2 to jump them both on the objective. So one jumped down off his vantage point and secured one objective, the other snuck underneath the cover there to lock up the other one. Seeing his chance to make a real statement, the Breacher Boy smashed through the wall with his Breacher Ram, heading towards that middle objective on the left-hand side to lock it down and put pressure on me, I guess, hoping to tempt me out of cover to have to come and deal with him. My response to this, fair to say, was a little bit lackluster. All I did was grab my Neophyte leader and popped him up on the vantage point there, hoping to take advantage of Shadow Vector with the mining laser there. That was definitely going to come into play next turn. The Orcs continued to shuffle into cover with the knob showing them just how it's done and heading out of that terrain there to hide behind the door to hopefully charge out on an unsuspecting foe in the next turn. So I got to do my first Genestealer Cult full sneaky tactical ploy here and take advantage of hiding. So I brought one of my Brood Adepts in and I brought him in as close as I could get to the Breacher Boy who'd snuck forward, being a bit audacious for my liking. I decided to show him the error of his ways by throwing a blaster charge at him. It was a big hit and left the Orc on just one wound. I'd have to think of another way to deal with him now. The arrival of the Neophyte allowed the Rocket Boy to bound up onto the vantage point there and open up. Luckily for the Neophyte though, he did have a little bit of a whiff and the Neophyte survived. For my next trick, the second Neophyte arrived from hiding. He was able to then land and throw his grenade to finish off the Breacher Boy, who ran through a wall for nothing. The rest of the turn saw the Orcs scurry into cover under the vantage points there, just staying out of line of sight, wanting to charge out next turn. I took the opportunity here to move my seismic cannon down the right flank. Originally my plan was to put it up on the vantage point there, but a bit of poor placement with my leader and forgetting again that I had climbing equipment meant I thought I couldn't get to the spot I wanted, and I really wanted him in a position to fire in the next turning point. So I made sure getting him where he was there, he had a great viewpoint throughout. He was still going to be able to see any Orcs who charged at that doorway, but he was also still far enough away to also avoid any charges. I also moved up the Calomorph and the Weber into positions where they'd be able to sneak into the center of the map a little bit later on. For the Weber and the Calomorph, they both need to be within that pentagon distance, so I was hoping to use them as counter charge units. So that was turn one in the books, and first thing was to look at the tac ops and the victory points to see what we scored. I was able to get 1 point for rout, which was good after killing the Orc sniper. I was also able to get 2 victory points for the 2 objectives I held. The Orcs also gained 2 for theirs as well, so both teams being pretty cagey in the early days, not pushing too hard for those center objectives. For me, that was pretty expected. That's what I was thinking anyway, was I would be willing to give them up for the first turn if it let my army get in a really good, strong strategic position. I was also able to clean up any of the Orcs that popped their heads up. The only one that was still visible at the moment, or at least up on the parapet there, was the Rocket Boys. He was one of the first things I was going to deal with next turn in terms of my strategy. The other thing was to also use some units earlier on, things like my Banner Bearer, units I didn't mind too much to lose, or if they had activations that bolstered the team. I really wanted to force the Orcs' hand. I really wanted to make them have to make first activation moves so I could kind of counter strike to what they did. I was very confident with the amount of shooting and the dangers I had through that center point of the board. If they kept coming out one at a time and didn't, use cover correctly or didn't really think about the ways I could hit them, that I could clean them up pretty heavily in the next turn. At the top of this turn, we also had to remove an objective each, both choosing the ones on the left-hand side of the battlefield. Main reasoning for me that being the one to go was it was the most exposed. The other one was still quite safe in the bit of Orc terrain just out of my deployment zone, whereas for the Orcs, it was much of a muchness. To start off turn 2, the Orcs nabbed the initiative and the Rocket Boy finished off the guy that he tried so hard last turn to blow up and finally showed just how dangerous they can be by wiping that Neophyte off the board. In response, my Icon Bearer shook his Icon aggressively in his direction, boosting the guys around him. I was hoping this was going to help to boost my shooting when the Orcs finally started to roll out of their fortress. Outraged by this aggressive, blatant icon banner waving, the Ork war boss stormed out of the fortress and sat right on top of the objective. A bold move. He could also see a neophyte there who he promptly took some shots at. Unfortunately, in a truly orcish display of shooting, he only managed to take off 3 wounds from the poor guy. In response to the holes just very recently shot through his t-shirt, the neophyte climbed up onto the vantage point there and fired back down on the Orc leader. Now, in a truly inspired round of shooting, this was ludicrous. He managed to take a whole massive bunch of wounds off the Orc Nob, and then the Orc Nob, like all good Orcs do, failed most of his armor saves, so that was something. The wonderful world of GA2 meant I could activate a second neophyte next, and I made sure that I did, sneaking up the one who had been holding the objective for me to get line of sight on the Nob. This was really part of my plan here, was to use these low value units to bring out the more expensive or more superior units of the Orcs and get them in trouble. So in this instance, I'm getting a lot of wounds or a lot of shots on the Orc Nob for very little cost to myself. So this is a win-win for me here. Unfortunately, the neophyte didn't agree and promptly whiffed all of his shots. So the Orc was still there, still relatively dangerous, and now that neophyte was sort of a little bit exposed. Now the Orcs were starting to come out of the woodwork a bit here. The Dakka boy jumped up onto the vantage point and promptly took out my neophyte who'd been very bravely hiding up there. He didn't stand much of a chance. This was where my target priority was starting to come into it, and I was really starting to make sure that my order of units, which ones I shot, being aware of how many activations my opponent had before things like Overwatch. So therefore I knew who I could move where and how I could counter deploy before I was going to take fire, or to maximize the efficiency of my offense here. To that effect, I moved up my Weber to try and take out the Orc Nob. He was dangerously close to being dead, so I thought taking him out would be very good. Although he wasn't going anywhere, he was able to take that central objective, and that was going to be a victory point. So if I could stop him scoring that, I thought it was quite important. I could also get the Weber in a position where he had at least some cover. Both of the enemy operatives up on the vantage points had already fired, so there was going to be time to get rid of them before he'd face any Overwatch. The only fear here was that some of the other operatives might charge out from behind those Orc forts, but I was willing to take that risk to take out the leader. Unfortunately, it didn't go that way. I only took off another 4 wounds and stunned him, and now leaving the Weber a little bit exposed. To nobody's surprise, the Orcs did respond very quickly. The Burner Boy charged out of the Orc fort and swiveled around the cover there to make sure that my operative wasn't going to get any cover. This did surprise me, as although it did maximize his ability to deal damage, it also did leave him very, very vulnerable to return fire from my guys. The Flamer opened up, and lo and behold, when the smoke cleared, a very crispy but still alive neophyte stood before him. The ever-jealous grenade launcher of the Genestealer Cult, very jealous of the cool rocket launcher the Orc boys had, quickly fired over and took him out. It was getting a little bit busy out around those middle objectives, and I was starting to get concerned that I might not be able to get all the Orcs destroyed or killed off those objectives to take back. I still had the Calamorph and my Sanctus to go, so I was very confident they were going to be able to take out a few units. Again, it was just still counting down those operatives and knowing that he had more operatives hidden in that fortress that were going to keep charging out. To that effect, the Comms Boy charged out to gain the center left side of the battlefield. He then lowered whatever the Comms Boy uses for a gun, took aim at the neophyte, and did a huge amount of wounds, leaving him stunned and struggling to find his bearings. It was time to start thinning the herd and make sure that I was also scoring some victory points. So the next thing I did was grab my mining laser, took him out of conceal and into engage mode, and mowed down the Orc Nob. In doing that, it meant that they'd lost their leader, which got me 1 victory point. I also got the second because it was the second turning point. This is also a great chance to use Shadow Vector here, so I activated that with the leader to get the ability to head back into the shadows with my gun, or heading back into the conceal order for the mining laser to keep him safe for the next turn. The bomb squig scurried forward, hiding behind a scrap pile, hoping to have an impact on the game in the next turn. The Sanctus stepped up next and quickly dispatched the Dakka boy, showing him who was the true boy of Dakka in this battlefield today. The Slasher boy was itching to get into combat, so took a bit of a risk here. He ran out and then dashed into the position in front of the seismic cannon, daring him to shoot him. He made that choice to basically stay out of the way of some of the other heavy weapons. The Ork commander there was pretty confident that he could survive a hit from the seismic cannon. Optimistic, but he turned out to be correct, as the seismic cannon smashed into the Ork and managed to stun him, which put a bit of a dent into the Ork commander's plan for the next turn, as now all of a sudden he'd be able to charge but not fight. So we'll have to wait till the next turn to see how that resolves itself. Next, it was 2 passes in a row as the Ork commando on top of the objective chose to stay the course and hold tight there, while my leader also chose to do the same thing. A little bit of a miscalculation on my part here, as I'd miscounted, and this actually meant the next activation, as you're about to see, was Overwatch, and it did actually cost me an operative. As you can see here, the burner boy finished off his barbecue from earlier in the turn and finished slow cooking the neophyte with the Weber. So that was the end of him, but I still had one more trick up my sleeve. That's right, everyone's rootinest, tootinest favourite space cowboy swung into action and promptly dispatched the burner boy before flipping around with a little bit of finagling through the terrain there, and then also finished off the comms boy in a display of gunslinging not seen in eons. That brought an end to a very, very, very eventful turning point too, especially for the Genestealer Cult, able to deal huge damage with impunity effectively against the poor Ork Kommandos who just couldn't seem to get a break or use the cover to the best of their advantage. I think this game, as I sort of said in the preamble, this setup and terrain and even the objectives really suited the Genestealer Cult and put the Orks in a really hard position. We did push into turning point 3 and I'll give you some of the key highlights for that. A very stunned and confused Ork slasher boy decided to use his throwing knives instead of charging uselessly into the seismic cannon, nearly taking him out. A hell of a throw considering he is concussed. He was then wiped off the board by the seismic cannon's return fire. Ork Commando came out and finally got into the game, taking out an acolyte before he too was promptly taken out. And unfortunately, poor little Squiggy never got his chance to live his true dream and blow someone up, as he was unceremoniously picked off from afar. And that meant that the Orks had actually been tabled and finished off, and it left the Genestealer Cult in a fantastic position, able to get those 2 middle objectives, as well as also able to get to the TAC-OP 1 for the Genestealer Cults, nowhere unreachable. So able to get that as well and secure that for 2 turns, so getting 2 victory points on that. The death of the Rocket Boy earlier in turning point 2 also got the 2nd point for that. So we'd maxed out all of the secondary TAC-OPs for the Genestealer Cult. We'd able to get the middle objectives for the last 2 turns, so filling up a lot of victory points there, and done a good job of sealing the game with that. Because of that confidence of what was left heading into turning point 3, that was the main reason I didn't push too hard at the end of turning point 2 to get those middle objectives. I knew I was in a very comfortable and confident position, and I could really minimize casualties. Not that that matters in Kill Team, but I like to keep guys alive if I can, and secure those things throughout that 3rd and 4th turning point to really finish off the victory. One of the biggest things it does highlight is that effective use of your synergies between your units. I think this game really allowed me to maximize the synergy between all the teammates, able to use the banner to help my shooting, able to use Shadow Vector with my leader to help out the mining laser, and even adjusting my positioning as well when things didn't quite go the way. Where I ended up with the seismic cannon was a huge, dangerous position that I probably earlier in the game it wouldn't have looked at. Both the Calamorph and the Sanctus proved that they are fantastic. They were both unreal this game. It will be very interesting to see how both of them perform against a much heavily armored team. Let's say things with power armor or, you know, custodes, units with disgustingly resilient. There's a lot of things that might show, although the Sanctus does have mortal wound output, it may be a little bit more of a slog. Having the high wound but low armor saved Orks up against them today also sort of suited their playstyle. I'm sure there'll be some hard counters to this list. So there you have it. Realistically, a game that ended far too soon, but for a whole raft of different reasons. It wasn't necessarily that, you know, Mr. Hurley played terribly. It was more, I guess, the map and the setup and the mission itself really favored my new team. It also shows how strong they can be and how much damage they can put out in the right situation. There's definitely small tactical missteps that we both probably did and things we'd take back and change and do slightly different. For the Orks, the biggest thing was probably they headed out one at a time and had really kind of funneled themselves in, got stuck behind the walls, and then were only coming out one at a time. And I think really what we needed to see them do was push as a big rush, maybe pushing one flank or the other, especially probably that side that did have the oil rig on it. That would have definitely provided a lot of line of sight blocking. It's heavy terrain, so you definitely could have used it to help hide some of your units and save them from that extra shooting I had, and allow the orcs to put a lot more pressure on my guys. If those heavy weapons have to move, if my snipers have to get off those spots, well, that's a turn of wasted shooting, or a turn where they don't really get to commit to anything. So potentially, if Mr. Hurley could have locked down that middle left side objective, it really would have forced my hand to have to change what I was doing. What it ended up being for me in this game was I basically got to counter-attack. I basically waited for him to move and picked off that operative once they got in the bad spot. Same each time, and even in that, especially in that second turn where I was really able to work out how many activations he had left, pick my order on the way I wanted to pick those guys off, knowing I had the shots. It really made it a bit easier to clean up. So I think we both definitely learnt a lot out of this game. And the next time we battle, I'm sure it'll be a much tougher game. So where do we go from here? I think the next step for me is to give some of the close combat models a go. The Locust, the Sanctus Talon. I've actually, from my last video where I did do a bit of a deep dive, a lot of people were asking questions a lot around the Locust and the duelist ability. And they were very good questions about, is this purely a defensive strategy, or do you get to implement it when you attack as well? And my answer is, I'm not sure. The way it's written, even when you are the attacker, and it does use the word the attacker, which doesn't necessarily specify the enemy operative, that you still get to do that free parry before you pick your first option or your first attack. So that's how I read it. Rules is written, but please jump below as well and let me know how you've read that rule. There's a few of them that are a bit ambiguous with some of the cult agent models. So yeah, if you've got any ideas or you've got questions yourself, pop them in there and let's get a bit of a conversation going and see between all of the brains trust if we can work it out. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This was a fair amount of work. I definitely learnt a lot of things doing this process, doing it a little bit differently. I definitely learnt some things I'd do differently and ways I'd set this project up. But the biggest thing I need from you guys after this video is your feedback, and let me know, what did you like about the tactical reports? What didn't you like? What was anything missing? Was there more you'd like to see? Was my tactical insight enough? A big thing about my tactical insight, guys, I am a recreational, casual player. I'm no tournament hound. I'm not out there, chasing the meta. I always play to have fun, but hey, I do like to win. So that's how I always sort of look at my games, is I always want to play the best I can, have a great game with a friend or a couple of mates, and then, do my best to beat them soundly in the nicest way possible. If you've got any tactical advice, I always love to hear things. If you can tell me, what do you think the Orcs could have done differently to counteract such a heavy shooting team? Was the way I set up the correct way? Was there models or setups that you would have liked to have seen that I could have done a little bit differently to make it even more of a convincing victory? The great thing about this game is there's so many different ways you can do all the different bits and pieces, and that's why I really, really enjoy it. Every game is unique and the same. These TAC reports I won't be doing weekly. I'll probably do these every second week. On the other off weeks, I'll be doing more of my faction deep dives. So having a look at other factions, what's coming up. I've still got to get to a lot of the White Dwarf teams. I've still got to get to the Chalnath. I finally built my Tau and my sisters and all that stuff. So they're alive. They do exist now. I've just got to get them on the table. It's amazing. It's hard to get more than one game in a week if I'm lucky. So there's some stuff to look forward to. I'm going to keep building all this stuff up. I really appreciate everyone out there for getting involved. I'm so touched by how many people have subscribed, how many people are following along with the journey, interacting on my Instagram, Reddit, all those different ways so we can talk the hobby and enjoy it full time is the best time. So thank you so much. Make sure you click subscribe if you haven't already. If this is your first video you've watched, well, welcome to the party. Get yourself a drink. Well, actually, it's over now. Sorry.
Thanks for watching.
So that's it. Grab your stuff. Get out of here. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll be back next Friday with a new video. So join us again then. My name's Reese. We'll see you next time on Threes to Wound.